If you believe kindness doesn't have to shout to be real, that sometimes the quietest gestures carry the loudest echoes, then you're in the right place. Here at Justice Reloaded HD, we tell stories that aren't about fame or fortune, but about the quiet power of compassion. The kind of moments that often go unseen, but are never forgotten. So if your heart still leans toward goodness, leave us a like and hit that subscribe button. Because today's story reminds us that one kind act can travel across decades and come back when we least expect it. Her name was Grace. She wasn't the type to draw attention. At 32, life had taught her to move quietly, to smile even when her heart felt heavy, and to carry on, especially for her son. 6 years old, bright-eyed, and asking about his father more often now. Grace never knew how to answer that question. How do you explain to a child that a man who kissed him goodnight never made it home the next morning? That a rain-slicked highway and a delivery truck erased a future they were building together? She worked the morning-to-closing shift at a small family-owned diner tucked between an old pharmacy and a gas station in New Jersey. The kind of place with creaky stools and coffee pots that never stopped brewing. Locals called it Mama June's, but to Grace it was her second home, and sometimes her only break from the storm she carried. She had learned not to complain. Life didn't owe her comfort, and she wasn't one to ask for pity. She came in early, tied her apron tight, and wore the same soft smile for every customer, whether they tipped or not. Her hands moved fast, clearing tables, refilling coffee, balancing plates, but her eyes told a different story. They were kind, but tired. Alert, but hollow. And at the end of every shift, when the last light flicked off and the register was closed, her coworkers sometimes caught her lingering a little too long near the coat rack, rubbing her eyes like she was just tired. But it wasn't sleep she lacked, it was peace. Despite the long hours and aching feet, Grace made a habit of looking people in the eye. She believed everyone deserved to be seen. Even on the days when her bank account barely blinked, or when her son's shoes were too tight and she had to choose between groceries or rent, she smiled. Not because things were easy, but because someone somewhere might need that smile more than she needed sympathy. Grace wasn't always like this. Once she had dreams, big ones. She wanted to be a nurse. She had even started community college courses before life pulled her into a whirlwind of hospital bills, funeral costs, and single motherhood. Now the dream sat in a dusty box under her bed, next to old photographs and a nursing textbook she couldn't afford to finish. And yet, she held herself with quiet dignity. The regulars noticed. Mr. Larkin, the elderly vet who came in every Thursday, always said, "That girl's got Grace in more ways than one." She chuckled at the pun the first time. After that, she just smiled and poured his coffee with the kind of gentleness people didn't expect to find in a roadside diner. What they didn't see were the overdue notices tucked behind her rent receipt. Or the nights she pretended to still be hungry so her son wouldn't feel guilty eating the last slice of pizza. They didn't see how, after tucking him in, she'd sit by the window and stare into the dark, wondering how long she could keep this balancing act going. But Grace never let it show. She believed in pushing forward. In showing up, no matter what yesterday looked like. Because even if the world didn't notice her struggle, her son did. And to him, she wasn't just a waitress. She was the whole world, holding itself together with nothing but grit and love. It was the kind of night where the rain didn't fall hard, just enough to make everything glisten under the streetlights. The kind of rain that made people stay home, curling up with warm soup and old movies. But Grace was still at the diner, apron tied, smile steady, refilling salt shakers and wiping down laminated menus that had seen better years. The place was nearly empty, save for a young couple in the corner splitting a burger, and an older man sipping black coffee near the jukebox. Grace moved with practiced grace between them, her mind half on the clock, half on the unopened envelope sitting in her purse. She hadn't dared look at it yet, but she knew what it was, the third notice in a month. Rent was due 2 days ago, and she was already running behind on gas. She was pouring a refill for the coffee when the door opened, letting in a gust of wet air. A man stepped inside, shaking off the rain from his hooded sweatshirt. His clothes were worn but clean, and his sneakers squeaked slightly on the linoleum floor. Grace offered her usual polite smile. "Anywhere you'd like," she said softly, motioning to the open booths. He nodded but didn't say a word, choosing a spot by the window, even though the view was just a misty parking lot. She brought him a menu, but he barely glanced at it. "Grilled cheese and water's fine," he said, voice low but clear. Then he looked up, really looked, and for a moment, Grace felt caught off guard. His eyes weren't rude or intense. Just observant. Like he wasn't looking at her, but through her. She gave a polite nod. "Coming right up." As she moved back toward the kitchen window, she could feel his gaze linger. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but in a way that made her strangely aware of her tired feet, her frayed apron strap, the small tear in her sleeve she hadn't had time to sew. She busied herself with orders, but the diner stayed quiet. The jukebox had stopped playing, the coffee pot sputtered softly, and outside, the rain painted trails across the glass. Grace moved through it all like she always did, efficient, calm, a quiet presence in a world that rarely paused. It wasn't until she rang up the couple's tab and walked over with their change that the moment unfolded. She reached into her worn leather wallet, the same one she'd had since her senior year of high school, and pulled out the bills. As she did, something slipped out, a folded sheet of paper, crinkled at the corners, fluttering gently to the floor. She bent down quickly, hoping no one had noticed. But it was too late. The man in the hoodie had seen it. The bold red letters at the top were unmistakable. Final notice, eviction warning. Grace tucked it back into her wallet without a word, smiled at the couple, and returned to the counter as if nothing had happened. But her hands were trembling slightly now. Not because she was ashamed, but because she was tired of holding everything together with duct tape and hope. A few minutes later, she brought the man his grilled cheese, neatly cut in triangles, just like the diner's tradition. He looked up again as she set the plate down. "Thank you," he said simply. She nodded. "Let me know if you need anything else." He didn't speak again. He just picked up the sandwich slowly, like he wasn't really there for the food. And Grace, though she tried not to, wondered why he kept looking at her like he recognized something, or someone, in the way she moved. She returned to wiping down the counter, trying to push the moment out of her mind. Just another quiet night. Just another quiet customer. But sometimes, the quiet ones notice the most. The man finished his meal in silence. Grace had noticed how slowly he ate, as if time meant something different to him, like he wasn't in a hurry to leave, or maybe had nowhere else to be. The grilled cheese sat half-eaten for nearly 20 minutes before he finally stood up, adjusted the sleeves of his hoodie, and gave her a gentle nod. "Thank you," he said again, same quiet tone, same steady eyes. Grace gave him the practiced waitress smile, the one she'd learned to wear like armor. "Have a good night," she replied, though her voice carried the weariness of someone who'd forgotten what a truly good night felt like. Then he was gone, no noise, no fuss. Just the soft chime of the door and the hush of rain outside swallowing his steps. She went back to cleaning, clearing crumbs and wiping down the booth he'd sat at. Her mind was already shifting to tomorrow's grocery list, to the shoes her son had outgrown, to the envelope in her bag. It wasn't until she reached for the check holder tucked beside the empty glass that she noticed something strange. There was a piece of paper sticking out, not a receipt. Something thicker. She pulled it free and froze. A check. Not a tip. A check. Her eyes scanned the numbers. Then scanned them again. $10,000. She blinked. Once. Twice. The fluorescent lights above flickered, humming softly, like they too couldn't believe what they were seeing. Was this a mistake? A prank? She flipped the check over, expecting to find a name, a joke, a catch. There was none. But there was a note. A small folded piece of lined paper, the edges a little worn, as if it had been kept in a pocket for a while. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, revealing a few short lines written in pen, Not fancy, not rehearsed. Just real. I grew up in the housing complex around the corner. There was a waitress who once gave me a slice of cake when my mom couldn't afford my birthday. Tonight, I saw that same look in your eyes, tired but kind. This is me, giving back to life. Thank you for being kind when no one's looking. There was no signature. No name. No expectation. Just a gift, and a memory. Grace's breath caught in her throat. She sat down slowly at the edge of the booth, check in one hand, the note in the other, as if letting go of either would break the spell. She tried to remember. Years ago, before the diner, before her husband, before life grew heavy, she had worked at a corner bakery after school. Minimum wage, too many hours, too little sleep. But she remembered the faces that came in. The regulars. The struggling moms. The tired kids. She remembered the little boy with wide eyes and ragged sneakers who looked longingly at the birthday cakes in the window. She remembered slipping him a slice when her manager wasn't looking, with extra frosting. It had been nothing. Or so she thought. And yet here she was, decades later, holding a check that could save her roof and feed her child. Not because she asked. Not because she cried. But because someone had seen her, truly seen her, in a moment when she thought no one was watching. She clutched the note to her chest for a moment, her heart aching in a way that had nothing to do with sadness, and everything to do with being remembered. In the quiet hum of the nearly empty diner, Grace whispered a thank you to the empty booth. Not just for the money, but for the message. Because sometimes, the greatest tip isn't a number on a slip. It's knowing that kindness comes full circle. She stared at the note again, tracing each word like it might fade if she blinked. Something about the handwriting, the phrasing, stirred a memory she hadn't touched in years. And then, like mist lifting from a mirror, it came back. 2 decades ago, Grace had worked weekends at a tiny bakery tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop, a forgotten little place near one of the rougher neighborhoods in town. She was barely a teenager then, earning just enough to help her mom with grocery money. The job was simple: box the bread, smile at customers, sweep the floor, and sometimes sneak icing when no one was watching. It wasn't the kind of place that had birthday balloons or party music. But it had cakes, modest ones, with piped borders and plastic candles in a jar behind the counter. Most days, people came in for rolls or discount cookies near closing. But she remembered one day so vividly, it could have been yesterday. A woman had walked in near dusk, holding the hand of a little boy, no more than 8 or 9. His clothes were too big, sleeves covering his hands, shoes worn thin. He didn't say much, just looked up at the display case like it held the secrets of the universe. There was something in his eyes, a kind of quiet hunger that wasn't just about food. Grace had asked if they needed help. The mother looked tired, like she'd walked a long way, and softly asked about the price of a small cake. When she heard the number, she gave a tight smile and shook her head. "Maybe next year," she murmured, reaching for the boy's hand. And something in Grace just couldn't let them leave like that. Her manager was in the back, counting receipts. No one would notice one less slice. She opened the display case, slid out a modest chocolate piece, added a swirl of frosting from the piping bag, and tucked a single plastic candle into the side. "Happy birthday," she whispered, setting it in a to-go box and gently pushing it across the counter. The mother looked startled. The boy stunned. He blinked up at her, lips parting as if to say something, but no words came. He just nodded, once, and held the box like it was gold. Then they left, the door jingling softly behind them. She never saw them again. Grace had long filed that moment away in the crowded drawers of her memory, one kind act among 1,000 small ones, forgotten in the daily rush of life. But now, holding this check, reading this note, it was as if time folded in on itself. Could it be? Could the quiet man in the hoodie have been that boy? He hadn't said his name. Hadn't given hers, either. But he'd seen something in her, and somehow, she had seen him once too. She didn't remember his face, not clearly. But that look in his eyes, that familiar silence wrapped in gratitude, it matched. And in that moment, Grace realized something powerful. Kindness didn't need to be remembered by name to be remembered by heart. He never came back. No name. No follow-up. No headline in the paper. Just the quiet presence of a man who stepped in from the rain, left a sandwich half-eaten, and a life forever changed. Grace waited for days, maybe longer than she would ever admit, hoping he might return. She glanced toward the door more than usual during each shift, her ears subtly tuning in to the chime that marked every new customer. But he never walked back through. And yet, it wasn't disappointment she felt. It was something deeper, a sense of reverence almost. As if she'd been entrusted with a sacred truth, that not all acts of kindness need applause. That some souls give without waiting to be seen, and in doing so become unforgettable. She thought about how easy it would have been for him to leave a business card, a note with his name, a phone number, something that said, "Look at me now." People do it all the time, giving to be noticed, helping to be praised. But he didn't. He slipped back into the night the same way he came, unnoticed by the world, but unforgettable to her. And that made all the difference. It was a strange kind of reunion, one that didn't involve hugs or recognition or tears. Just an exchange of silent understanding, carried across years and wrapped in the smallest of gestures. A grilled cheese sandwich. A folded note. A memory reborn. Grace thought about that boy, the one with oversized sleeves and hungry eyes. And she imagined the man he had become, perhaps still carrying the weight of poverty, or maybe having carved a better life through struggle and sweat. Whatever his journey, he had not forgotten. And in remembering her, he reminded her of something she hadn't felt in a long time. That what she did mattered. Not in the loud, world-changing kind of way, but in the quiet, unseen spaces of everyday life, where one small choice could ripple outward, touching someone long after the moment had passed. That night, after closing, she sat alone in the booth where he had eaten. The cushion still held the slightest imprint of his presence, like a whisper. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Instead, she closed her eyes and said a silent prayer, not for herself but for him. For wherever he was. For however life had shaped him. For the kindness he had offered not just in money, but in the dignity of anonymity. Because in a world obsessed with being noticed, he chose to disappear. In a culture chasing credit, he gave without name. And in doing so, he restored something in her, something no landlord's notice or sleepless night could ever take away. Grace would never know what prompted him to come that night. Whether he had planned it. Whether he had recognized her the moment she walked up. Whether he had carried that check in his pocket, waiting for the right face, the right pair of eyes. But she knew this. His gift wasn't just the money. It was the message. That kindness, once given, never dies. It waits, sometimes quietly, sometimes decades, to return. And when it does, it doesn't ask to be seen. It simply shows up, and leaves everything different. Grace didn't rush to cash the check. She waited 3 full days, not out of doubt, but out of reverence. Every time she glanced at the envelope tucked safely in her dresser drawer, she felt the weight of it. Not just the financial relief it promised, but the meaning behind it. It wasn't just a gift. It was a bridge between what was and what could be. When she finally walked into the bank, she carried the check like it was fragile, not because she feared it would bounce, but because it symbolized something more enduring than money, remembrance. The first thing she did was pay off the rent she owed. The landlord, who had grown used to her late payments and quiet apologies, blinked in surprise when she handed him a cashier's check, full amount, no hesitation. Then came the overdue utility bills, the shoes for her son, the trip to the grocery store where for once, she didn't have to choose between milk and cereal. She bought both. And fruit. And a little cake, just because. But even after all of that, there was still more left. Enough to do something she had long dreamed of but never imagined possible. It started small. A handwritten sign taped near the register. Saturday specials, free meals for single moms and kids. People noticed. Some raised eyebrows. Some smiled. One man tried to insist on paying anyway. Grace just shook her head with a warm smile. "It's already covered," she told him. By the end of the first Saturday, she'd served 14 meals: grilled cheese, soup, chicken and waffles, chocolate chip pancakes. Kids laughed. Moms exhaled. Some of them cried quietly into their coffee. But every single one of them left a little lighter. Word spread, not through advertisements or social media blasts, but through whispers, the best kind. The kind that passes from one heart to another, the way real stories do. She called it the Kindness Meal Fund. A little corkboard near the register held thank you notes drawn in crayon, scribbled with broken English, or folded into origami hearts. She didn't do it for recognition. But seeing that board fill up reminded her, what you give doesn't disappear, it echoes. Next to the board, she placed a small wooden sign. Nothing flashy. Just carved words, soft and sure. You don't know who today's kindness will reach. But someone will remember it forever. Some customers asked where the idea came from. Grace only smiled and said, "Someone helped me once. I'm just passing it along." She never mentioned the check, or the note, or the man in the hoodie. Some stories aren't meant to be told in full, they're meant to live on in gestures. And that's exactly what happened. Each Saturday became something sacred. A little weekly miracle stitched into the fabric of a quiet New Jersey diner. No camera crews. No charity logos. Just warm food, softer eyes, and moments of dignity restored. Her son, now old enough to help out, took great pride in handing out menus and crayons to the other kids. Once, he looked up at her and asked, "Did we win the lottery?" She knelt down, brushed his curls gently, and said, "No, baby. We just got reminded how rich we already are." Because Grace knew, the true wealth wasn't in what she received. It was in what she could now give. And in the silence of a place that once echoed with only scraping forks and tired footsteps, laughter returned. So did hope. All because someone years ago had once been given a slice of cake, and chose to return the favor, without a name. If you believe that kindness never really disappears, that it simply changes hands and finds new hearts, then help us keep that light alive. Leave a like to pass it forward. And don't forget to subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD for more stories that remind us what truly matters. Thank you for staying with us until the end. We hope today's story left a warm imprint on your heart. And we can't wait to share another beam of light with you soon.